Louis Bossle, 1853-1929, the best rat catcher in the land. Who is your favorite literary rat? Templeton, the hoarder from Charlotte's Web, was the first one I recalled. But then I remembered that Louisa May Alcott's March sisters had a pet rat named Scrabble, and Ron Weasley's pet rat is named Scabbers. And one of Beatrix Potter's least favorite creations is Samuel Whiskers. And don't forget Ratty from The Wind and the Willows. Man and rat have shared the same spaces throughout history. The rat feasts off scraps left behind by humans, an apple core tossed into the bushes, or a slice of pizza on the subway track becomes a banquet. Now, rats are not true parasites. Parasitism involves a relationship where one subject is harmed and the other benefits. Rats and man have a commensal interaction, a symbiosis, in which members of one species gain benefits while those of the other species neither benefit nor are harmed. Now, this is in contrast with mutualism, in which both organisms benefit from each other, amensalism, where one is harmed and the other is unaffected, and, of course, parasitism, where one is harmed and the other benefits. As early as the Dark Ages, man associated the rat with disease, and clever men looking for a way to make a living became rat eradicators. The most famous was the Pied Piper of Hamelin. This is an excerpt from Robert Browning. Rats, they fought the dogs and killed the cats, and bit the babies in the cradles, and eat the cheeses out of the vats, and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles. Split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. Into the street the piper stepped, smiling first a little smile, as if he knew what magic slept in his quiet pipe the while. Then, like a musical adept, to blow the pipe his lips he wrinkled, and green and blue his sharp eyes twinkled like a candle flame where salt is sprinkled. And ere 3 sheer notes the pipe uttered, you heard as if an army muttered, and the muttering grew to a grumbling, and the grumbling grew to a mighty rumbling. And out of the houses the rats came tumbling, great rats, small rats, lean rats, brawny rats, brown rats, black rats, gray rats, tawny rats, grave old plodders, gay young friskers, fathers, mothers, uncles, cousins, cocking tails and pricking whiskers, families by tens and dozens, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, followed the piper for their lives. From street to street he piped advancing, and step for step they followed dancing, until they came to the river Weser, wherein all plunged and perished. The rat is the first animal in the Chinese zodiac. The order of the animals in the 12-year cycle was due to a competition among animal candidates and judged by the Jade Emperor, the ruler of heaven, earth, and hell. The emperor's advisors selected 12 candidates from among the animal types, including the rat and the cat. The winner was to be selected based on merit, as to personal appearance, lifestyle, contributions to the world. Before the competition, the cat asked the rat for a wake-up call to get to the show on time. But the rat was apprehensive of true competition because of the cat's beauty, so he did not wake the cat up. And it was only after the embittered cat overslept that it became a ratter and a mouser. The Jade Emperor was mystified as to why only 11 candidate animals showed up. His servants hastily acquired the first possible replacement animal which they encountered. It was a pig. The rat won the competition by performing on the flute while upon the back of an ox. Impressed, the Jade Emperor placed the rat at the beginning of the 12-year cycle. He placed the ox second for being so generous as to allow the rat to play the flute upon the ox's back. And then the other animals were placed in order according to the Jade Emperor's judgment. There are more than 30 diseases that can be spread both directly and indirectly by rats to humans. The most notorious, of course, is plague, a disease that causes rapid onset fever, chills, weakness, plus necrotic tissue, swollen lymph nodes, buboes, that's where the term bubonic plague comes from, or pneumonia, pneumonic plague, which can be spread from human to human. Every year, about 600 people in the United States are diagnosed with plague. Other diseases linked to rats, hantavirus, that's what killed Gene Hackman's wife, Betsy Arakawa, leptospirosis, rat bite fever, salmonellosis, tularemia. Indirect transmission happens when a rat's parasites, like ticks and mosquitoes, also bite and infect animals. The diseases that they transmit include babesiosis, Lyme disease, West Nile, and of course plague. And although they are warm-blooded mammals, rats are not reported to transmit rabies. Smaller animals, like rats and squirrels, are usually killed in an attack by a rabid animal. They just don't live long enough to transmit it to humans. Rats arrived at the docks of Philadelphia from all over the world. After they deboarded at the Delaware River, they spread first to the warehouses and then to businesses and private homes. A night watchman at the wharf described the scene in an 1888 article from the Times of Philadelphia. Rats? Why, there's more rats hopping along Delaware Avenue at night than there are stones in the street. All of the wharves are swarming with rats. They do thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage in a year. Half a dozen rats can gnaw through into a box of herring in a night and make the box and its contents unsaleable. The ships are mostly all full of rats. They live in the holds and hide in all sorts of places. During a voyage from here to London, 100 rats will ruin as many boxes of cheese or tubs of lard. Rats are very fond of cheese and lard and tallow and butter. They like smoked fish, too, and have a passion for dates and figs and sweet things that are brought here. I've seen rats running across this wharf as big as cats and as bold as lions. They grow very large and fat and hardy here on the wharves. They're different from stable rats and the rats that live in the big stores. They're tougher. The water rats that have their nests underneath the wharves grow very bold in winter and forage over the wharves for winter rations. A hungry rat is an ugly animal. The water rats and the land rats don't mingle with each other. Their wishes turn on you and jump at you when they get cornered. I've seen regular processions of them here in this market, but I never interfere with them. I don't like to have nothing to do with rats. Needless to say, people were willing to pay a premium to make the rats disappear from their ships and their barns and their homes and their offices, and especially their hotels and their restaurants. Ads for rat catchers were a regular feature of the city newspapers. Every few years, the newspapers would offer a human interest story about the profession during the 1890s and 1900s. There was an 1893 article in the Philadelphia Times. It's titled, Rats on Steamships, Tricks of the Ratcatchers. Each one was the only man who knew how to exterminate rats, all the others in the business being merely dishonest fakers. Now, I'll tell you how Smith does it when he gets a job to clear out a ship. He goes on board at night. He has a man with him. The man has perhaps a dozen or more dead rats in his clothes. Smith goes below with his man, stays there all night, probably catches a few rats with the long tongs he uses. Then he adds to them those his man has sneaked on board, throws them all on the deck before the captain or first officer at 4 o'clock the next morning, and then he gets his pay, $5, $10, and he clears out. He generally takes the dead rats with him so he can play the same game with them on some other ship. And then there's another story, this one about Jones. When Jones gets a job, he goes into the kitchen at night with his man. All the lights are turned out, and they have only a dark lantern to work by. The man, as he goes in, has a potato sack rolled under his arm. During the night, they dump into this sack a cabbage or so, 2 or 3 dirty dishcloths, or any other worthless stuff lying around. They catch about a half a dozen rats, and they put them in the bag alive. And when they march by the desk the next morning, Blank says to the night clerk or manager, 75 this time, or any other number he thinks fit. The clerk sees there are rats kicking around in the bag that the man carries over his shoulder. That bag is apparently half full of them, so he drops the fee quickly for fear the rats should escape from the bag. When they get around the corner, this pretty pair empty the bag, rats, garbage, and all, into an ash barrel. There are lots of tricks in this trade, I can tell you. And if you want to get rid of your rats, you have to employ somebody what's honest. Now, when I was stationed in Vietnam, from May 1968 to May 1969, I was with a mechanized unit, which means we had an armored personnel carrier, where we would set up our battalion aid station in the field. I became a rat catcher by default. We knew as soon as we set up, within a day or two, the rats would arrive. And for some reason, they liked to live under Big Angel. Big Angel was our battalion aid station. Once or twice, we would try to flood the rats out of their burrows with water, while one of us waited at the exit with a sharpened metal pole to transfix the varmints as they came dashing out. Once 2 of my fellow bobcats got a little too clever. They decided to burn them out. They poured gasoline into a rat hole and threw in a match. Both of those men ended up being evacuated with major second-degree burns. 1893, the Philadelphia Times sent a reporter to spend some time with rat-catcher Lou Bossle, who was calling himself Lou the Champion Rat-Catcher of the World. Louis Bossle, B-O-S-S-L-E, was born to French-born Joseph Bossle and American-born Louisa Stegman on December 14, 1853, in Philadelphia. I began rat catching when I was a cabin boy on board a ship which sailed between this city and Liverpool. The vessel was infested with rats, and the captain offered to pay me a very good premium per head for every rodent I could catch. The offer was tempting, and I started in the business in earnest, with the result that I was soon earning more wages at rat catching than I was as a cabin boy. But the captain was an honorable man, and he lived up to his bargain, always promptly paying me whenever I presented a dead rat the premium he had promised. While in Liverpool, I became acquainted with several men who made rat catching their business. I learned some of their secrets, particularly regarding the management of dogs and ferrets. I have been established now since 1870, and during that time, as you may imagine, I have been the death of thousands of rodents. The Almshouse in West Philadelphia was the largest contract I ever had. He's talking about the Bloxley Almshouse, where mentally ill people were placed, were essentially stored away. The Almshouse in West Philadelphia was the largest contract I ever had. It took me about a year to clean out that place, and I could not begin to tell you how many rats I killed there. It was literally overrun with them. Some of the patients in the hospital told me that so thick were the rats, they would jump up on the beds and make sleep almost impossible. It was a nasty job to clean the rats out of that hospital, I tell you. As, would you believe it, many of them were diseased, having contracted various complaints from eating the plasters and rags and bandages which were taken off the patients. I lost 2 of my best dogs over there at the almshouse by their contracting diseases from the rats. I also cleaned the rats out of the Rittenhouse Club quite recently. I tell you, they were pretty thick up there. And I believe that newspaper offices are about as largely infected as any other business place. Now, when I cleaned out the Times building before the Times Annex was erected, I gathered in 450 rats there in about a month. Lou talked about his various methods. Well, first I let my ferrets loose in the walls, and then I spread my nets. I stop up such holes as I cannot cover, and then I am there myself. I spread my patent rat powder. It is a stuff that has an unusual odor that never fails to attract rats. I came across it in a very strange way. One time I was out in the country cleaning out the barn and house of a very wealthy citizen of this city, and when walking along the creek I saw a weed growing there, which somehow attracted my attention. And I plucked 2 or 3 sprigs of it, brought it home, hung it up in the garret to dry. And when it was dry, I happened to think of it one day, and just for fun I said to myself, I will powder that up now and try what it will do for killing rats. It was the purest kind of experiment. I mixed it in with some meal and served it to several rats I had in a cage. The rats took to the food like old 60, and in a course of a few minutes after they had eaten it, they were all dead. I think I jumped up and down with delight when I saw the result of my discovery. Now, Lou, your fortune is made. You've got a sure thing. The next move in your experiment is to see whether this stuff will work in all cases. And so the first opportunity I got, I baited it around a rat hole. Well, it drew rats just like a magnet does a needle. And what was the best part of it, they would not go back in their holes and die. They seemed to be obliged to get out in the open air and gasp for breath. When I'm all ready to catch the rats and the ferrets are loose in the hole, I just sit and watch, and presently they come. If they're not attracted by the powder at once, why, the dogs and I go for them, and sometimes I shoot them with a revolver. Lou demonstrated to the reporter how quickly a ferret could kill a rat. It took about 30 seconds. And how fast a dog could kill a rat. That only took about 20 seconds. He pointed out that as a rule, neither the ferrets nor the dogs ate their fresh kill, although he would sometimes not feed his ferrets for 48 hours before a job, so they would be more ravenous when they attacked. He bragged about breeding his own ferrets. They're a rather queer animal to take care of and require a certain kind of treatment. They're not intelligent particularly and do not know their master except by handling. It is very important that you should know how to handle them, as their bite is exceedingly painful and disagreeable. It is only occasionally that they become tame and can be handled by strangers. They're a short-lived animal, their period of existence being, as a rule, 3 years. Ratcatcher Lou was in the news again in 1896. This time he was visited by a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer. There's no byline on the story, but we find out about halfway through that the reporter is a woman. I do not know how many women worked as reporters for the Inky in the 1890s. I have to assume it was not very many. The only one I know of is Tilly Mae Forney, the daughter of John W. Forney. She's buried in the river section at Laurel Hill West. I mentioned her in the podcast about her father. Whoever this reporter was, she describes Lou's laboratory and office, which she says, quote, are as neat as wax. Upon a compounding table are arranged bottles and jars of various chemicals. From the ceiling hang 2 large wire cages, which are used in rat-killing exhibitions. A meat cutter prepares the food for the 15 or 20 rats in the cellar, and traps, dark lanterns, tongs, unlike the normal article, and 2 high, narrow bags, unmarked ferrets and pierced with many breathing holes, giving plenty of local color. In the backyard, in a beautifully built little house of their own, surrounded by vines and flowering plants, are the ferrets. Costing $3 each when imported, Lou puts them into immediate training, and after 3 months would not take $50 for any one of his pets. Lou charged an average of $25 to clean out a house or a business. That works out to about $950 today. Several restaurants and bakeries had him on contract. He would go back 2 or 3 times annually just to stay ahead of the pests. He didn't always bring the terriers and the ferrets. His skill with poisons was legendary. In a 3-night process, Lou would start by laying out a smorgasbord of meats, fish, vegetables, grain, to see which this particular family of rats preferred, and he laced the feast with small amounts of phosphorus. The second night, the concentration of phosphorus was a little stronger. By the third night, the rats had adjusted to the taste, and they greedily ate everything he put before them. This gave them an unquenchable thirst, and they drank ravenously in a vain effort to get rid of that thirst. They swelled up to 3 times their normal size, and in the morning could be gathered in heaps as they were too large to get back into their holes. Much to her amusement, the writer earned for herself the distinction of being the first woman to lay aside the prejudice of her sex and indulge in the excitement of a rat hunt. Wishing to investigate the condition of some cheap restaurants and the extent to which they are rat-infested, a small party set out one night recently with all the paraphernalia for a still hunt, bent on exterminating the unwelcome occupants of a certain 6th Street eating house. The revolver was left behind, not calling for sufficient special skills, and tongs, harpoon, the bag, and a bicycle lamp supplied the means of war. Lou went ahead to reconnoiter, and when the way was clear, masquerading under the guise of a variety performer with a rat act, that the suspicious hostility of the landlord not be aroused, made their way to the rear of the house. A little damp alley was flanked by the kitchen on one side and a storeroom on the other, with 2 windows that looked on a small yard. A faint light in the storeroom showed fat rats, which scattered at the approaching stops, feasting on a ham which lay on a greasy block. 2 uncovered tubs of butter stood pleasantly ready, and bones and trimmings of meat covered the floor. The decaying floor was broken in many places, and keen eyes in numberless little heads poked up to see what would happen next. The intruders seemed harmless, so presently out of their holes they came, ran in and out of barrels of shriveling cabbages, traversed the butter, renewed their attacks on the ham, and appeared in the most startling fashion in unexpected quarters. All the time, first from one corner and then from another, underfoot and overhead, came shrieks and squeals in 50 different sharps and flats. The harpoon was taken out and jointed, the lantern lighted, and with caution the hunters proceeded down the rickety steps to the cellar. The light of its narrow radius fell upon piles of boxes, moldering straw, carrion, tin cans, and ashes, over which scattered in lawless haste multitudes of gray forms, while from every side in the darkness came suspicious rustlings and confirmatory squeaks. The light was veiled, and then suddenly turned on the mass or boxes and barrels. Blinded by the sudden glow, the rats stared stupidly at it for a minute, until Lou's keen aim impaled them in quick succession on his harpoon. Through the cellar they went, the writer following with quaking steps, though she cannot confess to much alarm when the lantern was at the other end of the cellar, and she stood in darkness with rats running across her feet, and the sound of their shrill cries and hurrying steps surrounding her in every direction. Her feelings were not of the pleasantest. Reading the reporter's account makes me wonder if George Orwell may have had something like this in mind when he wrote about Winston Smith's dread of being eaten alive by rats in the novel 1984. 1909, the Enquirer ran another article on modern-day rat catching, but Lou is not mentioned by name. A pair of ferrets set loose in a large house will keep it constantly free from rats, but care must be taken to keep them away from the chicken house, since they are as fond of eggs and young chickens as they are of rats. The mongoose of India and China is a large ferret, and the sworn enemy of rats and snakes. Some years ago, the planters of Jamaica were much annoyed by a large species of rat that destroyed their sugar cane and growing bananas, and the thousands of snakes brought to the island to destroy the rats interested themselves in some other kind of game and made it unsafe to walk across the fields. So the mongoose was introduced, and within 3 years, scarcely a snake or a rat could be found on the island. But at the same time, the little animal is almost entirely rid of its bird life, and chicken raisers will pay a reward whenever one is killed, although the authorities must not hear of it, since the mongoose is strictly protected by law. Another example of unintended consequences. On September 4th, 1914, the Philadelphia Bureau of Health erected a rat receiving station at the Race Street Pier and offered a bounty, 2 cents for each dead rat, 5 cents for live ones. By January 1st, 1915, the Bureau reported that 5,238 rats had been turned into the station. The Bureau of Health was also greatly expanded during this time, including the hiring of a team of special agents, the Rat Patrol, who inspected all incoming ships and set and monitored traps all along the waterfront. Ratcatcher Lou stayed busy. In 1926, there was an article in the Evening Post of Nottinghamshire, England. Mr. Louis Bossle of Philadelphia, who in his native city is known as Ratcatcher Lou, is on a visit to Nottingham. Yesterday he called at the Evening Post office and in the course of conversation said he'd been associated with rat catching since 1887. If you remember earlier, he said he started in 1870. His biggest haul consisted of over 400 rats taken out of one building in less than 24 hours. He's made use of ferrets, traps, and dogs, and has much faith in preparation for luring on the rodents. Mr. Bossle mentioned that he'd received as much as 3 pounds for one day's ratting. Let's see, 3 pounds in 1926 London, that's worth about $235 in 2025 America. Louis Bossle died at age 75 in 1929. His death did not make the Philadelphia newspaper obituaries. His death certificate gives his occupation as exterminator. His cause of death, pernicious anemia. He's listed as single. He's interred in a plot not far from the bell tower at Laurel Hill West. The shared obelisk has several inscriptions, but the side that faces west says Louis Bossle, known as Ratcatcher Lou. Now, according to an article from the March 23, 2025 edition of the Inquirer, Philadelphia, being one of the country's largest cities, also has a rat population in the top 10, where we have been ranked for decades. But despite our nickname of Philadelphia, we as a population logged fewer rat complaints per capita in 2024 than Baltimore, Boston, Washington, D.C., and New York. Public health officials have various theories about why rats haven't taken over neighborhoods. Large population of feral cats, cleaner alleys, lids on trash cans. The fact is nobody knows for certain why we don't have rats scampering around Center City sidewalks. In my 30 years of working Philadelphia area emergency departments, I can't recall seeing anyone whose complaint was rat bite. If the mood has captured you, there's a Wes Anderson 17-minute short film called The Ratcatcher. It was released in 2023. It stars Ralph Fiennes, who looks very much like a rat, and Rupert Friend. It's based on a little-known Roald Dahl short story called The Ratcatcher. And I am afraid that we're just a little bit too late to celebrate Ratcatcher Day. It occurs every year on June 26th. That is the date that the Brothers Grimm assigned for a visit to the German village of Hamelin by a piper wearing his multicolored or pied costume, and who merrily piped the rats into the sea.